Before diving into this story, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe, because here, every story is a new emotion you won't want to miss. She was chasing a better life. He thought he already had it all. But then just a cup of coffee, a single glance, and nothing would ever be the same again. Angatu was born in a quiet village deep in the heart of Para, Brazil. Her skin held the warmth of the sun. Her long, straight hair flowed like the river she grew up near, and her eyes carried the calm of someone who had seen both hardship and beauty. Her name, Angatu, meant good soul in the Tupi language, and that's exactly what she was. With a heart full of dreams and courage bigger than fear, she left her village behind to build a future in the city. She studied English at night, took online courses in business, and eventually landed a humble job serving coffee at a powerful multinational firm in São Paulo, thousands of miles away. In New York, Paul lived in a world of glass towers and perfect order. Young, wealthy, and undeniably handsome, he was the kind of man who moved through life with sharp edges. Built by discipline and silence, Paul was raised under the strict eye of his father, Edward, a legendary businessman now battling illness. Paul didn't believe in love, nor did he believe in joy for joy's sake. To him, emotions were distractions, romance, a weakness he could never afford. When Edward's health declined, he sent Paul to Brazil to oversee the company's Latin American operations. Paul accepted the task with the same cold precision he applied to everything. Another mission to complete, another country to conquer. He arrived in São Paulo uninterested in its rhythm, unmoved by its color, but everything shifted one morning, when a soft, unfamiliar voice offered him coffee. And the woman behind that voice, calm, radiant, unassuming, would soon become the one thing Paul never saw coming. Paul walked through the glass doors of the São Paulo office like a storm in a suit. Every step was precise, every word measured. People moved aside instinctively, intimidated by his presence. He spoke little, observed everything, and trusted no one. Then, in the middle of the sterile routine, she walked in, a tray of coffee in her hands. She moved quietly, as if part of the background, but her presence was strangely magnetic. Her eyes held something Paul couldn't define. Not challenge, not flirtation, but a quiet confidence. She said, "Good morning," in accented English, then disappeared. And yet, her image stayed with him far longer than it should have. Over the next few days, he noticed her again. Always punctual, always efficient, always calm. But what struck him most wasn't her work. It was the book she read during her break, a thick volume on international economics. Paul paused, pretending to check his phone, just to watch her turn the pages with quiet focus. One afternoon, a scheduling error created chaos. The secretary was panicked, confused. Before Paul could intervene, Anatu calmly stepped in. In 2 minutes, she reorganized the meeting slots and fixed the issue. No drama, no credit seeking, just precise, calm action. She treated everyone with kindness, from the janitor to the CEO, but never once did she lower her eyes or act submissive. There was pride in her posture, strength in her silence. Paul found himself lingering in places he never used to, just to see her pass. Something about her shattered his usual armor. And then one morning, she smiled at him, not with her mouth, but with her eyes. That subtle, silent smile hit him like a wave. It wasn't flirtation. It was truth, a warmth that refused to be ignored. Paul felt something shift in his chest, a crack forming in his carefully controlled world. Their conversations began by accident, a misplaced file, a comment about the rain. She answered with honesty and a touch of dry humor that caught him off guard. He teased her once lightly, almost without thinking, and she fired back with wit. It was the first time in years he laughed without planning it. She spoke of her home without shame or pity. of the rivers, the trees, and the way her grandmother used to braid her hair. Paul listened, genuinely drawn to the colors in her words. He asked more questions than he meant to. Her simplicity wasn't lack, it was depth. Every encounter left him unsettled in the best way. He began arriving earlier, walking slower, hoping to cross paths with her. He studied her without meaning to. The way she tied her hair, the way she listened, the way she never seemed rushed. She didn't try to be noticed, and yet he couldn't look away. What Paul didn't realize, not yet, was that he had already started to change. Her presence, quiet and strong, had entered places inside him he thought were long sealed. It wasn't just admiration. It wasn't just intrigue. It was the beginning of something unfamiliar and entirely undeniable. Paul was restless. For the first time in his life, spreadsheets and contracts couldn't quiet his thoughts. He was falling deeply, and it terrified him. Love was chaos, and he had spent his whole life avoiding it. But with Angatu, his walls were cracking faster than he could rebuild them. Edward noticed. Stern and possessive, he accused Paul of being distracted by a cleaning girl. He reminded him of the legacy, the empire, the expectations. "You're not in Brazil to fall in love," he snapped. Paul, numb and confused, packed his bags and left without a word. Angatu waited the next morning with quiet hope in her chest. But Paul never came. Days passed, then weeks, and she understood. He had left not just the office, but everything they hadn't yet spoken. She cried, not because he left, but because she believed he might have stayed. Months later, Edward passed away. Paul inherited the empire, the shares, the responsibilities, but everything felt hollow, like a perfectly wrapped gift with nothing inside. Late one night, going through old folders from Brazil, he found a photo, Angatu serving coffee, her eyes full of light. That image shattered something inside him. He remembered her laugh, her questions, her stillness. He wasn't missing a woman. He was missing himself, the man he had started to become with her. Without another thought, he booked a flight. This time not as CEO, just Paul. Back in São Paulo, the office was colder without her. No one knew where she'd gone. But Paul searched. Days later, at a bustling local fair, he found her, hair braided, clipboard in hand, explaining profit margins to a fruit vendor. His voice cracked as he stepped forward. "You were never just a cleaner. You were always the soul of the business." Paul stood before her, no suit, no mask, just a man with regret in his voice and love in his eyes. He apologized for leaving without a word, for letting fear speak louder than feeling. He told her about his father's death, the emptiness that followed, about how nothing, no boardroom or building, could fill the space she left behind. "I didn't come back for the business," he whispered. "I came back for you." Angatu listened in silence, her gaze steady, unwavering. She didn't cry, she didn't run into his arms. With quiet strength, she said, "Love only matters when it comes whole. With respect, with truth. If you only see me now that I've become someone in your world, then you never truly saw me at all." Paul stepped closer, humbled. "You were never someone in my world," he said gently. "You were the world I didn't know I needed." He looked into her eyes, heart open. "You taught me that profit without purpose is just numbers, and your soul is the most beautiful thing I've ever known." Her eyes softened, and this time she smiled. Cut to a beachside ceremony at sunset. Simple, heartfelt, full of life. Angatu wore a white dress made by artisans from her village. Paul stood barefoot in the sand, holding her hands with reverence. Vows were exchanged, not just of love, but of partnership, of building something greater together. They returned to the company not as boss and employee, but as equals. Paul restructured the firm to support community-driven projects. Angatu led a new division empowering local entrepreneurs. The office, once cold and corporate, now pulsed with life, laughter, and purpose. Profits rose, but so did meaning. They traveled together, spoke at conferences, and inspired a new generation of leaders. People began to call their business the heart of commerce. But they just smiled. For them, it wasn't about titles. It was about living with soul and remembering where it all began with a tray of coffee and a single look. Voiceover as the screen fades to warm light. Sometimes the simplest soul holds the rarest wisdom, and true love, it doesn't shout, it listens. It heals, and quietly it changes everything. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. Your words might inspire the next story. And hey, if you felt something real today, consider subscribing. We're building a community where stories heal, connect, and change lives. One video at a time.